back. In the past 24 hours, protests by members of Nigerian Labour Movement have threatened to disrupt public peace again. The public expression is an anger in connection with the proposed amendment to the minimum wage in the country. In Abuja, protesters converged at the Unity Fountain before storming the National Assembly. Rice correspondent Punariman Feitola reports.
Workers demanding their wages are protected. The National Assembly has plans to remove the minimum wage, allowing state governments to negotiate directly with their staff. That's something that caused anger during nationwide protest on Wednesday. The demonstrators reached the National Assembly and kept going. They were met with some resistance by security, but it wasn't enough to stop them.
Sorry.
Protesters laid siege to the National Assembly, threatening to disrupt parliamentary proceedings if their demands are not met. Union leaders addressed the workers on their rights, saying the minimum wage is in line with international standards.
Comrades, we are here today on behalf of Nigerian workers, on behalf of Nigerian pensioners, on behalf of the downtrodden, to make it clear and unambiguous that the bill that seeks to remove the minimum wage from the exclusive list to the concurrent list is not accepted. Let me say that the issue of national minimum wage is a standard set by the International Labour Organization.
Yes. The workers are met by lawmakers who promise to give the bill their attention.
For what I'm seeing now, it appears to me and to the leadership that the organized labor are against that bill. And if you are against that bill, you are right, you have your reasons to be against it. We'll be on the ground in the Green Chamber of the House of Representatives to do justice to that bill. And I can understand the only justice to that bill is to kill the bill. Is that your position? Is that your position? Is that what you want? Remember in the 8th Assembly, I was the spokesman of the Senate. And I recall vividly, this issue of minimum wage was brought and we killed it. Your president is here. And because of that, I want to believe, has the conditions that led to the 8th Assembly decision changed? No. Nigerian workers, has the condition changed? No. I therefore want to say very clearly that in the past, we have stood toe-to-toe with the Nigerian workers. There is nothing that suggests we are changing from that direction. Rather, we will stand by you to ensure that the fundamental right of every worker is not only enforced, but is ensured and guaranteed.
Protests took place across Nigeria, with workers complaining of a rise in fuel and electricity prices, an increase in the cost of food, and a high rate of unemployment. Punarman Feitola, Arise News.
Here we go again. Another strike looming. Here we go again. The cycle has started again.
Yes, but I just don't understand whose idea it is, who is really attempting to move the issue of labor, item 34 on the exclusive list and their salaries and what have you, to the concurrent list. That is clearly a recipe for disaster. You'll recall we never said anything more than tripartite agreement. That was the phrase. We went on and on endlessly, and there was so much resistance from the governors at some point, well, some governors, during those negotiations for this current minimum wage that I want to say that they're enjoying, but who's enjoying 30,000 naira minimum wage is still, pretty modest. But a lot of governors were claiming at the time that they simply cannot afford to pay 30,000 naira because of, federal allocations being lower and what have you, which I think is just such a shocking thing to open your mouth and say as a governor of a state. Anyway, the idea of now moving something as important as minimum wage to a state, under a state legislature in the concurrent list is raising legitimate fears that minimum wage will be slashed. I do accept the arguments that the standard of living costs differently across the country. Like what you earn in Lagos, you don't get as much bang for your buck in Lagos as you would maybe in another state. I understand that. But we have seen, like we saw with Adams Oshiomhole when he was governor of Edo State, a minimum is not set in stone. You can increase it for your workers if you choose to. But that minimum must be sacrosanct. I vehemently disagree with the idea of the minimum wage being moved to the concurrent list when there's so many other things that we should move to the concurrent list. That minimum wage is the last one.
Well, first, the issue of national minimum wage is not a matter it goes beyond Nigeria's interest. Nigeria is a signatory, is one of the countries that ratified the Convention 131 of the International Labour Organization. Convention 131 deals with the payment of wages and talks about the national minimum wage. And that was the point that the labor leader who was shown on the screen was referring to, that, look, this is a matter of international convention to which Nigeria is committed. And the whole idea internationally is to protect decent work and to ensure that workers' interests are protected. However, although, yes, according to the labor leader, Waba, he said about 33 federations, including the United States, the UK, Brazil, some other countries, have a national minimum wage structure which they subscribe to. It is also true that in some countries, you could have variations in different parts of the country. But here, this protest was, ignited by a motion proposed on the floor of the House of Representatives by Honorable Sadiq Mohammed from Zabongiri Federal Constituency of Kaduna State. And he was the person who was proposing that, look, we should move the national minimum wage from the exclusive list to the concurrent list. Now, it's still at the level of a proposal, but I think that, organized labor decided to respond very quickly. And I think they are in order to protect their interest. And what they are responding to is the situation in Nigeria and the experience with, the payment of a national minimum wage. For Nigeria to even review the national minimum wage, it took years of struggle by organized labor. So that's why the labor leader, Aliyu Waba, is right to describe this as an attack, a declaration of war against the Nigerian worker. And why it is a declaration of war is a point that has been raised by Tundu. Do you know that at a time when the minimum wage was even 18,000 naira, many state governments could not pay it. They were even negotiating with workers in some states that their own states would be able to pay just 10,000 naira. I think some lawyers went to court to say, look, state governments cannot reduce what has been fixed by the federal government because it's a matter of law. Now, even now that it's been increased to 30,000, some states are paying percentages. In some states, I can't immediately recall names, they pay 10% or they say they will pay 30%. So you don't expect that organized labor will now fold its arms and allow the legislation on minimum wage to be moved to the same states that have not shown commitment to the interest of the workers. And, it wasn't only in Abuja that they protested. It was statewide, nationwide. State houses of assembly received, protesters, labor, workers, protesting that this should be rejected. So,
I mean, Dr. Yemi, you said it well, and Tundu, you said it well. The sad reality is, even if they say it's 10,000 naira minimum wage, some states will not still be able to pay. All right, moving on to more business. Report on the Arise News channel this morning is Michael Wilson joining us from London. Michael, great to have you. Good morning, Michael.
Hi, good morning. Financial markets dodged a few bullets, really. That's the way they're looking at it overnight. Core inflation in the US came quite high, but the most important figure is core inflation, and that printed at 1.3% year on year. Now, that's slightly lower than expected, so that was actually quite good. The bond auction didn't, as I was suggesting yesterday, tell us a great deal about inflationary worries, slightly lower. The Biden stimulus package, a bit more on that in a second. That was signed off. He'll talk to the nation, or the US nation, tonight, 1.9 trillion. Inflation fears, yes, still about that. Wall Street's one more inflation bullet to actually swallow, which is the other bond auction, the 30-year one, which happens today. So inflation concerns still continue into the week. So therefore, Asia equities higher on the US-China hopes. This meeting is now going to take place in Anchorage in Alaska. Regional markets have seized on hopes that Chinese-US relations could improve, might be bullish for trade. Mainland China equity markets up, neighbours Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea doing quite well. In fact, a lot of those markets kind of outperforming. There's a lot of optimism on these two leaders getting together. Mainland China's Shanghai Composite left by 2.3% overnight, or over our night at least. Fellow high trade markets in Hong Kong and Taiwan rallied up too. So to the United States, recap there, the passing of the Biden stimulus package through the House saw Wall Street go back to its sort of cyclical rotation, going back to those non-tech stocks. Dow Jones to a record high. S&P also up about 0.5%. Tech-heavy NASDAQ, usual kind of headwinds you'd expect about that. There's the infrastructure package as well, which will follow on from this, is actually quite hopeful for the US economy. There are worries, of course, about the economy overheating. Developed economies, which depend on exports, will like all this. Developing countries, which have high debt, will not welcome it, may have trouble servicing it. The Quad meeting, this thing that's not met between Japan, Australia, India and the United States. They haven't met for a long, long time. In fact, it'll be the first meeting since the US, Japan and Australia first formed the group in 2007. But it's good that they meet. Basically, it's often regarded as a counterweight to China's growing influence in Asia. However, the White House has indicated it was not going to be about traditional security concerns. It's going to be about what they describe as the community crises that are facing, the global community crises that are being faced because of the pandemic, and also climate, and asking for a lot of financial cooperation. So we'll be getting the results of that. Facebook, meanwhile, it's asked the US judge to dismiss antitrust charges which have been levelled against it. Part of this continuing thing, assault on big tech. Facebook said yesterday the complaint was nonsensical and ignores the reality of what they describe as the dynamic, intensely competitive high-tech industry in which Facebook operates. Apple, another high-tech company, cut orders by iPhones by 20% due to decreased demand for its little phone, the iPhone mini model. Apple's new iPhones are still in high demand, though. Plans to build 230 million in 2021, and Apple shares closed down just about 1% as a result of that news. We're going to get today, an interesting one here. Brussels is going to tell us what they agreed with China towards the end of 2020. It started as a breakthrough deal, criticism, obviously, for non-EU countries. The deal will include cars, private healthcare, cloud computing and air transport ancillary services. We'll get the detail of that. That will be very important news today. UK and global businesses are backing Britain, more attractive than before Brexit. 5,000 companies said that, once again, one of those rather old-fashioned pictures of the House of Commons. It certainly doesn't look like that these days. But anyway, US, China, Germany, the top three. The UK is now number 4. Chinese executives keen on Britain despite the increase in corporation tax, but looked at in the round, apparently Britain still gives global companies quite a decent environment. Collapse of Greensill. This is a private equity company, put thousands of jobs at risk. I haven't really been following the detail of that too much for you over the few days, because it has been a bit domestic, but it will contrast, I feel, to this vote of confidence from PwC's survey. There'll be lots of questions about the regulatory performance of within the UK. 35,000 workers, including 5,000 Liberty Steel. Fresh questions, therefore, the regulatory regime. And good old Marks and Spencer's, what they're doing, they're starting selling clothes online from 11 rival clothing brands. That's Hobbs, Jules, Phase 8, White Stuff, for example. From March, they're trying to go through what they describe as a transformation program there to turbocharge online growth. We'll see about that. Still worried, though, about its presence on the on the high street, and still obviously having to work through the property that it has there. Its big Marble Arch store is apparently, as I was saying yesterday, going to be offices and retail as well. As far as commodities are concerned, oil markets still continue to consolidate. Gold on the ropes again, continuing to show a bit of fight. Rose again overnight. We're looking forward to the ECB. After weekly jobs figures from the US, I'll be talking about those with Reuters later on today, but the ECB releases its latest monetary policy measures. What it feels, there won't be any change in anything at all. They still will try to calm the markets through a bit of communications exercise, but what they will be doing is front-loading the money that they're putting onto the market, and also their buying of bonds, because they're clearly worried the cost of borrowing is going to increase slightly in the future. So to get this kind of money out of the way will suit them. That's your global view. Well,
quickly, yesterday I was going to ask you about the statement by the Director General of the IATA that very soon, in a matter of weeks, that many of the airlines backed by IATA will introduce vaccine passports. That's more or less what he was talking about, as a way of making sure that traveling is encouraged to ensure recovery within the aviation sector. And that also, in addition to the about $117 billion that governments had put into the aviation sector, that sector still needs about $70 to $80 billion for it to recover. But would the vaccine passport thing, will it necessarily help the aviation industry globally, considering how that particular aviation has been adversely affected? And would there be enough coordination to achieve the objective that the DG of IATA was talking about? And then as for the stimulus plan, the America Rescue Plan, yes, big victory for President Biden. But what do you think is likely to be the cost of the unilateral nature of the passage of the bill? The Republicans were totally against it. They complained about the price tag. They complained about debt burden, tax burden. But Janet Yellen insists that it's better to spend big, because in any case, at the moment, interest rates are still low. Is that a strong justification? And what is likely to be the fallout in the long term?
Right. So, yes, you're absolutely right. The vote was very narrow, 220 to 211. All the Republicans voted against it. And for reasons, for example, of saying, this is money being given without any accountability. Democrats, for their people, saying this just shows that we're there to help, and it increases the backbone of the country and so on. I think the infrastructure, the package that we're going to get details of is a bit more interesting than this. I mean, what this has been means tested. It's still open to debate as to whether people will actually spend the money or save it or hoard it or pay off their dets and so on. Will it be inflation? Yes, it probably will. But I think everybody knows the concerns about that. I suspect it probably will be inflationary, but that's a way down the line. I think the infrastructure thing is much more important because it actually gives people jobs to go to do. So it's the state helping out on that. As far as IATA is concerned, there's been a big move in Australia to help the two national airlines there with complete state aid. There are big competition issues about this right the way throughout the world. So that's number one. A lot of the people in the tourism industry are saying that it's far too narrowly focused, and there are plenty of people who work in the tourism industry in Australia, for example, who are complaining about it. Internationally, you put your finger on it, absolutely. Vaccine passports, I think, personally would work. I wouldn't worry about that. I don't know whether you would. I certainly wouldn't. However, it's about whether countries actually can do it. Can the whole world come together on this? It looks like, and I've only got the details from Australia again. I'll be talking about this with Reuters later on. But the fact is that their international flights won't really start working until late 2021. Whether that's going to be enough to get big executives face to face and all the rest of it for business travel, that'll be a problem. I think there will also be, on a much broader note, there'll be industries within those countries whose airlines get state aid, if indeed they do, will be saying, well, so what about us? What about things like steel? What about agriculture and so on? Will they get similar kind of government aid? Again, this is something that politicians earn their money trying to discuss. I think that it really does ask some very, very important questions, which you've quite rightly put your finger on. I think vaccine passports are certainly a step forward. Cooperation throughout the world, well, that's also a big question, isn't it?
All right, thank you so much, Michael.